Last week we were talking about messages of death. And when I spoke about that, I said we need to differentiate death from mortality. I thought mortality is a healthy notion that our life here is limited. And therefore we have so much time to do all the things that we really want to do. But on the other hand, death is something that can happen through the years of our growing up on a regular basis. And also death can be something that limits our enjoyment of life. And I told you about people sometimes give us what I call death messages that we appropriate and become our own narrative of death. And we feed ourselves with it, and we tell ourselves that we're not good enough, we're not pretty enough, we're not smart enough, we're not the right people at the right time, and so on and so forth. So everything that limits the enjoyment, the full enjoyment of life, are those messages of death. And we have the choice of turning them into our own narrative. I also told you that even when you fail to life, life will never fail you. Because the source from where all the life of the world comes is God. And with that relationship we have established with him comes from him, not from us. Remember the story of Father Damien of Molokai, which was a priest who worked in Hawaii in a colony of lepers. And he had an assistant, a woman, who was always helping him with the kids and taking care of everybody. And that woman, who was also a leper, got tired of doing that and decided there was another, because they could do whatever they want, a group of the lepers have formed a group of people who were having, let's say, fun, drinking and dancing and having a good time. Not that in fact was a negative thing, but he encountered this woman within one of those parties because he was missing her. He hasn't shown up to help him. So he went looking for her and found her, and she was with this group of people. And he didn't say anything, but her eyes were enough for this woman to feel guilty and judge. And Father Damien, she says to Father Damien, I'm entitled to have a good life. And he said, I thought the good life was to help people in need, was to watch those kids who nobody wants to watch, take them to school, help them out to have a future in their lives. I thought that was the good life. And I had to say from the start, being a good Episcopalian, God is not adverse to fun. And anybody who knows me know that, because I love having parties and dancing and having a little bit of drinking, not a lot, but just a little bit. So it's not a question of that the good life is described as just sort of boring, monotonous service to others. I think that's part of life. But we have to understand when we say enjoyment of life, we have to clarify what we're talking about. For me, you can define life, enjoyment of life, as to be present. It's the first thing there is. And you will say, well, we're here. No, your mind often is somewhere else, either in the past, or if you just get one little board here, in the future. When am I going to get out of here? We had to be present today, and we are here. And I think that's a fundamental element of enjoyment of life. We need to be honest with ourselves, first and foremost, because our capacity for denying ourselves is just incredible. The capacity to fool ourselves with our own concocted lies is enormous. I had this woman in one of the towns where I worked in Cuba, whose sister was very short of breath. It was so obvious to everybody. And when I mentioned that to her, she said, she's fine. She didn't want to admit that her sister actually was dying, and she did, actually. So having a full life is also to have hope. To realize that no matter the circumstances you are going through today, they will change. So to have an enjoyment of life, in other words, is to have God as our model, who had never stopped loving us, no matter what we have done. One of the curtailments of the enjoyment of life is fear. And I was reading Anthony de Mello, which I recommend to anybody. And Anthony de Mello says, we're not afraid of the unknown. We are afraid of losing the known. We have become used to a particular way of things that might be very detrimental to ourselves, but nevertheless, we are addicted to that kind of relationship or kind of environment. So a good life is, as I said, to be honest to oneself and ask ourselves the question, is this a life that helps me to be a better person or not? And listen to the answer honestly, without fear. However, fear interposes and tries to keep us settled in what we have normally done. And I have called Lent the season for ceasing of automatic behavior. Because we do a lot of things. Like when I drive my car, in Cuba I had to drive a standard, which for Americans is like, oh my God, what am I going to do with this? I was so used to it, I would, push the clutch, engage the engine, and then take off. And I did all of that like this without even thinking about it. So Lent is the time for us to pause and think of the things that we do on a regular basis that may be or not detrimental to ourselves, instead of just doing them and keeping them around. One of the things about good life is that in good life, you must grow. You can't stay always the same. One of the signs of a good life is to grow. And that means that you are open to change. There are things that you need to let go, or there are people that you need to let go. The spirit of Lent is to be with Jesus as he dies like a grain and comes back again. You remember, I think this is a universal thing we have done in every school in the whole world. I dare to say this. The experiment of the beans inside a glass and a little cotton inside and wet, and to see them how they grow. I think, has everybody done this in their school years? Everywhere. In Cuba, we did it. Everywhere I asked this question, everybody answered yes, we do the beans thing. And for me, I was surprised, to see these dry beans becoming alive under the right conditions. So when Jesus today says to us that having life is like dropping a seed on the ground and in a way die to what you were before and become something else, is a force of nature that takes place every time in our lives on a regular basis. The disciples are scandalized by Jesus announcing his death, because the idea of success is not an American invention. It has been around for centuries. And so people think if Jesus is going to be successful, he has to have a lot of people and following. And therefore, who is going to follow a leader who is going to die? Who not only is going to die, and he says at the end of the gospel, he introduced the issue of the cross in a shameful death. Because to die on a cross meant you will die naked, which for the Jews was almost like death. Because the intention of the whole process of the passion is not just to kill the body of Jesus, it's also to kill his persona. That in the whole paragraph, in the whole portion of the gospel, we didn't read the whole chapter, but before the chapter, the portion we read, there is this woman who pours nard perfume over the body of Jesus, which was another way that was used for embalming dead bodies. So Jesus is in a death moment. And then he announces that he, as a seed, will fall into the ground and die, and he will multiply out of that. Jesus has preached, has healed, has formed a spiritual family, and now the next step is for him to die and to go on a cross. The dynamics of death and life have then changed by Jesus. And if you read that passage again, you will notice that some people came to see Jesus visiting Lazarus because they were interested in knowing this man who came from the dead. So the issue of life and death was very present. In the model that Jesus presents to us, death will never have the last word. And that's what I said at the very beginning, that even if we fail to life, life will not fail us. Jesus said there's nothing greater than dying for one's friend. I personally have been in moments of death. In moments where nothing seems to be working for me, where my world is crashing down. And I am saying you don't take this in a stoic manner, because that's not what Jesus taught us. Jesus taught us that he fought emotionally in Gethsemane garden to deal with the fact that he was going to die. And today in the passage he says himself, I am troubled. I have worries. This moves and shakes me to the deepest. I went to Gethsemane garden. And Gethsemane garden in Israel, in Jerusalem, is outside Jerusalem, facing the city. So from Gethsemane garden, what you see is the back of the Temple Mount. So when Jesus is struggling with this issue of dying on Gethsemane garden, he's looking at the place where he was going to die. So I'm not saying that we need to be stoic in the process of dying. In the process not of dying physically, but dying emotionally to conditions and situations in which we have found ourselves. But the resurrection of Christ basically confirmed to us the fact that nothing can kill permanently. That we will one way or the other find our way back to life. Whether in the last moment of our physical life or through all these changes we must face during our own growing up. The only thing we can do is to trust God over appearances. Let me tell you, Jesus fed, they said 10,000, 5,000, who knows how many were there. There was a lot of people. And you see, people come from a free meal with no problem whatsoever. I mean, free meal over there, off you go. If you're hungry, doesn't matter, just fish and bread. You know, the best sauce is hunger. But then all of a sudden, when he comes to the cross, he says only 3 people. So he had gone from 10,000 to 3. And the appearance of everybody will say, he failed. He did not succeed. With his death, everything is ending. And there we are here, 2,000 years later, telling this story. Did he fail? Did he really fail? How often we have predicted our own failures without ever happening. I said that last week. We are always crossing the bridge before we get there. I was a member of this congregation. It's a person with some disabilities. Apparently, he was going to live a life rejected by his family due to his sexual orientation and neglected by his friends because of his inability to communicate. And he just last week found love. He just found love, found somebody to love, and somebody who loves him. And the transformation is just amazing. He was drinking before. He stopped that right away. He was a Kelly Tavern disciple for a while. Had to cope one way or the other with with the situation he found himself in. This family, this spiritual family, never abandoned him. Was always here, not judging him, but here for him, ready and able. And I have seen him just flourish. Even his own disability has kind of come down. I'm thinking, treatment and nothing in particular other than love. The fact that he is in love and someone is in love with him. I think what we need to do is to understand that love is more powerful than death. Amen.